Okay, welcome back everyone. Now I would like to welcome you all to the panel portion of today's events. This is the audience participation part of today's symposium. And I'm honored to be able to introduce today's panelists who will share their insights, wisdoms, and hopefully some questions that they have for each other that they have developed over the course of their careers. First, I'd like to welcome back our keynote speaker, David Burge. Next, Ian Harkness. Ian is the Director of College Counseling at Malvern Preparatory School. Seated next to him is Cornell LeSane. Cornell is the Vice President for Enrollment and Dean of Admissions at Allegheny College. And then Stacey Cunitz, who is the founder and director of Blue Moon Educational Consulting. So since we are live streaming this event, I will solicit questions from both our audience here in the room as well as our audience participating online. In order to provide the best experience for both audiences, I will repeat or reframe each question for our panelists so that it can be captured on the microphones. Before we start taking the questions from the groups, I have one question that I'd like to start our panelists with. These folks have done panels at a variety of different locations and places and for a variety of different reasons. And my guess is that one of the questions that they usually get asked to end a panel is if they had advice for the students in the room, what is their one piece of advice? And I'd actually like to start with that question instead of ending with that question today. So this is one of the few times where I will ask the panelists to go down the line. Whoever is ready can jump in right away, but what is your one piece of advice that you have for students who are just beginning their college search? How would you encourage the student to frame the process?
I can jump in there, I guess, Dave. Maybe I'll go back to one of your key points from earlier today, or even with the discussion. I think for us, and after rereading a colleague's book, The Truth About College Admission, written by Brennan Barnard and Rick Clark. So Brennan is a school counselor, writing it from a college counselor's perspective. Rick Clark, Director of Undergraduate Admission at Georgia Tech, helped me even in the last few months reframe the leading with why rather than leading with where. And I think for a student, that's going to be an important, why college question as the cornerstone to building the rest of that process around that question of why. I feel like so many times, even in the last few weeks, and we talked to our boys about going home for Thanksgiving and dealing with that question of where, wouldn't it be great if all of us changed our language ever so slightly to not ask students where, but think about why initially?
I think I would build on that too. I think that's great advice. And I think that like having your true north in terms of examining your own interests, your own desires, your own needs. Think about the best learning experiences that you've had up to date and search for those. Search to replicate those great learning experiences. Search for what's important to you. So having that true north and at the same time sort of staying open because you're 17, 18 years old and it's possible that maybe you don't know everything yet. And so maybe there are some new experiences that might inform you.
So mine is similar in some respect. I tell students to start this process being true to themselves. And what I mean by that is when they choose activities, when they choose their classes, pick things that they are truly interested in. And so at the end of the process, when they are looking at colleges and universities, they don't find themselves the wrong match. And what I mean by that is sometimes when you talk to students, they'll say I'm involved in X club or I'm involved in X organization. And you ask them why, and they say, well, I think it'll look good on the resume. And where I try to help them with is saying, okay, well, if you do all these things that you truly aren't interested in, you could end up at a place that truly isn't the best fit for you because that's not who you are as a person. And so making sure as you go through this process, yes, there's some level of self-reflection, but to being true to what you are mostly or truly interested in, I think will take you so much further, and you'll ultimately end up at the right place versus putting together a resume that isn't necessarily you.
Maybe this is along the same lines, maybe totally different. And parents, I don't know if you wrestle with this or not, but I for the first 15 years of being a parent, lived in constant fear that I would be discovered as not knowing what the hell I was doing, and realizing that the children have all the power, have more power than they ever possibly know that they have. And now that I'm in this spot with my oldest child, that's exactly what I want them to understand, is that they have more power in this process than they possibly can imagine. And I've watched them basically assume that the college process is something that happens to them and not something that they can drive and build. And I think when they see they have power, they are more likely to make a positive choice in a fit institution, and less about trying to get the best offer or the series of offers, but rather trying to get to that place where they feel in control of their educational destiny.
Thank you. I'm going to keep hopping over here to be on camera and then step out of the way to let the focus remain on our group. But at lunch, there were some discussion questions. I heard lots of tables kind of spin off of those topics, so I'm hoping that at some point in your discussion, you generated some great questions for the panelists. And now is your turn. So whoever is most excited to go first. Mr. Dent.
So I thought your talk, to begin with, was really interesting because in many ways it was broader than my limited focus that I was coming at this, looking through the lens of a head of school. And what are our particular challenges at this point in time, which for me is more along the lines of sustainability as a business operation, rather than fixing the long-term problems of American society. Not that those aren't issues we're not looking at. We've got $5 million or more of financial aid we give out to try to provide opportunities for a range of individuals to create a real-world experience. But we also need to make enough money to survive. So the lens that I'm looking through, the challenge comes back to what are ways where colleges might be able to be more able to see the strengths that we are presenting through this college process of really great creative thinkers that might be assets to universities, yet the process you go through at state schools versus small colleges and things. What are the best ways in which we might be able to see some progress in being able to make a decision that can really best assess our students that we're presenting in the process? I'm wondering how that process can grow so you have a clearer sense of which candidates might really be assets versus the markers that you might be forced to use or limited staffing-wise. So it's along those lines that I was thinking about.
So I volunteered that I would reframe every question in that.
You know what I'm asking.
Let me see if I can do this. All right. So in our personal and professional lives, we all see the world through different lenses. In your personal and professional lives, you see the world through different lenses. How do we reconcile those things so that students can articulate who they are in a meaningful way? And this might be start on the college side, but for the high school folks, how do you encourage them to frame the lens that they see the world so that it's being presented in a meaningful way for both the college and the student?
Do you want me to start? You said you would call on the person with the most pained look on their face.
That's why I'm writing.
Can I ask you a question and respond before I answer that? When you say progress, what does progress look like to you?
So the fact that SATs are no longer a requirement,
Okay.
that might allow some kids that have more to bring but maybe aren't great test takers. That may be a better way of assessing, what they might bring. That's what I mean as by progress.
Okay.
Can you just sort of
I can reach. So the question I asked and the response that came back was to define progress of what that looks like in the context of admissions, and the answer being different measures that are equally predictive but perhaps different than the historical measures. And I'll start and then I'll quickly bow out. But in my point of view, there's the way that we make the decision that's meaningful and impactful for a fixed number of students, unless we start thinking differently about how many choices we're going to make, which was somewhat the focus, like my lens this morning, which I heard you acknowledge and see. So there's this, and if we don't fundamentally rethink that, then I think we are just shuffling chairs on the deck to say, well, now more of your students will get an offer, but fewer of yours will get an offer, because I am limited, and I am limited myself in the number of students that I will accept and I will take. Now, where you would in theory see progress in the enrollment manager's point of view is that if our picker is broken and we get better at picking, then you should see better downstream metrics. Like, in other words, the students who are more likely to retain and more likely to graduate quickly, which is, I think, in everybody's best interest. And I think the next 10 years are going to be fascinating. And you called upon one of the reasons that are going to make it fascinating is the evolving emphasis of standardized tests in the college admissions process. And I think I applaud what the UC schools are considering doing and moving towards. I think that is going to be a brave new world for all of us. I think that there are a wealth of new tests that are likely going to come out. Some of them are going to be successful and some of them are going to be horrible failures. We talked a little bit about, at my table, about the, and I'm forgetting the name of it already, it's the adversity index that College Board tried to roll out and within, 48 hours tried to roll back because of some pretty sizable pushback from the market. And so it does beg the question that in a decentralized system, which is what we're operating in, how then can you provide some level of centralization of evaluation across institutions without making it either too inflexible or too onerous on the limited size and the staffing? And so in respect to your question, that's sort of how I answer. I still get concerned, though, if we're not talking about getting more people into the tent somehow, whatever that looks like. As long as we're doing both, I think we're being thoughtful about it.
I think from a different perspective too, I kind of want to say that, and I don't know if this is useful or not, but I think that our kids right now, especially kids who go to your school and schools like your school, are already doing a very good job of representing themselves in the college admissions process. And they are writing beautiful essays that show their values and who they are as people. They have recommendation letters that really speak to the depth of their experience and what they bring to the table. And it's not helping, right? Like, it's, they're getting in and not getting in the same ways that they were. And I think that that there's a piece of it that, to me, is about changing that conversation, because I believe very strongly in fit, and I think that fit is really important, and I'm happy to talk more about what fit means, because I think sometimes we toss that out a lot, we don't really define it, and I have some thoughts about that. But for now, what I will say is that I also care about adaptability, and I think that, and resilience, and I think that kids are actually equipped to do well at a variety of institutions, some of which have a name that everyone knows, and some of which have a name that fewer people know. And I think that part of what we have to be doing is also changing that conversation so that we can help kids to remember that one of the things I like to say to students is the best thing about the college that gets you, the best thing about that college is going to be that you're there, right? And like you bring all of your talent and experience and perspective to that place, and you get to make a mark on that place, and you get to have agency and impact on what your experience is going to be like at that place. And that could be, again, it could be a wide range of institutions, and maybe you actually even have more ability to make an impact at a place that has less of a name. So I think to me it's also about reframing the conversation.
I don't know if we need to reinvent the wheel. I think there's enough information out there that we already have. And as I sit back and think about application read season, which we're in right now, and thinking about how thick some of those files already are, and adding to that, I think what ends up happening, in honesty, is that you end up advantaging the advantage. When you start to add more and more, that is just out of reach for most, and that's a concern, I think to me. I also think we do have to change how we talk about this process, because typically when we start talking about, how can we have our students, present themselves in a stronger light, we're really talking about a certain set of schools in some cases, when in reality, so many schools are admitting more than 50% of the students, where for them, they're not having those discussions. They're saying, I'm admitting 60%, I'm admitting 70%, I'm admitting 80% of the students, and while I think, unfortunately, we give way too much praise to those schools that brag about, saying no to 95%. When at any point did that become a positive versus really saying, look at these schools who are saying yes to 70, 80%. So I think we really do have to change the narrative, because I think our students are hearing us. And it's one of those moments of, do as I say instead of do as I do. And what I mean by that is we all have to look in the mirror and think about how we can have better conversations. One example I'll give, we do a reverse fair every year, where instead of we basically have the colleges behind the table, but it's counselors on the other side. And I listen to a number of counselors talk about, hey, make sure when you go to this fair, don't just go to name brand schools. And then for certain schools, you see them sit behind the tables and you realize, nope, exact same thing. The counselors are running to the exact same tables. And so I think we all have to get better about how we talk about this process, but also make sure that we are preaching what we teach as well.
I don't have a ton more to add. I feel like you guys have some really good points. But I feel like maybe a part of your question is also how to measure success outside of the individual student finding fit. And we talk about that a lot. And I mean, that is really the hardest part of my job, I feel like. And trying to measure success for 125 individual young men every year, it's going to look vastly different. And I feel like perspective and looking in from the outside really doesn't tell the whole journey. And I think maybe if we're all in this together to change that subject, it's really talking more about the story and the individual story and the journey from beginning to end, and highlighting some of those strengths rather than the number of acceptances at X, Y, or Z, or percent to top 50, or however we all decide to end up measuring that success. One of our students this year graduated, and I know on graduation day, because I received some questions about why he chose to enroll at a certain place, it's purely because he might have been one of the most conservative in our class and most likely to return to us as a priest. And knowing that part of his journey end result makes a lot of sense. But I know that the questions were stirring kind of underneath the conversation on graduation day, specifically with that guy in mind. But my hope is that we can all step back from that to see the whole journey, not just the final decision.
Yes, in the back.
With that said, when we're talking about how do we put forth students, in a way that it's appealing to colleges that truly represents what they can do, where would something like the mastery transcript fit into that?
So the question is asking about the mastery transcript. You're all nodding like you know what that is. So would you like to Ian, do you want to discuss, just preview that, and then everybody can weigh in on that piece?
So the questions about mastery transcript, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of some of those conversations really from the beginning and get to travel out to participate in some of the dialogue that some independent schools were having related to capturing student success and their story without grades. So eliminate the grading scale that currently exists and measure them based on their ability to master certain subjects rather than, or not, in a variety of different areas as defined by a school. So if effective communication consists of 5 key areas and the student mastered 3, but was only proficient in those other 2, what would that look like on a pie graph, or how would we change the transcript completely? I think the question's a really good one because it begins to make your lives much harder, right? It wouldn't purely be based on a number or a letter and force the hands in many ways of admission enrollment leaders to dive a little deeper. I think that raises a lot of questions. Putting on my former life as an admission person, I don't see the reality of that in every instance. Certainly with time, certainly with retraining and reshaping everything that currently happens in a college enrollment and admission office. I see it as a big stretch. However, Malvern was lucky and privileged to be a part of those first few conversations, and really what happened as an outgrowth of that. For us, it's less about getting rid of grades wholesale, but starting to measure some of those other really important learning moments at a higher level. And so it might be communication, it might be leadership, it might be, I don't know, entrepreneurial, is that a word?
Let's go for it.
So if one student decides that he wants to start the beekeeping club because he has a passion for bees, presents it to a board on our campus of our own, right? Does that take the first step towards a leadership credential of some sort, right? Where maybe there's only 5 students in our entire school that receive this type of leadership designation, not in a way that there's any real rubric for achieving that success, but really for the purpose of giving the student a goal that's not related to a grade, that is purely based on his, and I say his because we're all boys in Malvern, his pure goal and interest for the future. So we've pulled back the process of looking at each class or each core subject, math, science, English, social studies, and really looked at that from the bigger picture within our community. Were we missing opportunities to tout the best leaders, to tout the best communicators, to really highlight a few things that kind of flew under the radar for students that maybe wouldn't stick out as they're applying and including 2 sentences or 3 on a common application description. I don't know if that directly answers your question, but I think it's the mastery conversation for us has become much more about how to highlight those other pieces or help a student articulate some of those other things and even empower some of those choices, not for the sake of admission, but for the sake of their own story and their own interest.
I think that's a fantastic question, and I think that on the college side, we're already receiving pressure from employers to focus more on KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities. Meaning, I don't care that you took an English 101 class, I want to know how you performed in the following criteria across a multitude of classes. So I think whether we're talking about getting into college or getting out of college into the job market, what you've just described is the future, and there's been an area that has had so little innovation over the last 30 years. This is speaking of someone who used to read handwritten transcripts not even 10 years ago from many schools, predominantly rural, lower income areas, admittedly. So what I think we have to be careful of there, though, is that we're not just trading one set of potentially meaningless letters and numbers for a different set of letters and numbers. And so it has to be thoughtful like that, and it has to, what I like about it is that there seem to be more broad concepts that are at play that cross over not just into the classroom but out of the classroom. But that will be one of those innovations I think that will take 10, 20 years to latch on, because until you get a critical mass, it's going to be, I think, very difficult for the admissions process to treat that completely differently.
Well, and I would just say, so Dave introduced me as the founder and director of Blue Moon Educational Consulting, which is correct, but I also am half-time at the Krefeld School as their college counselor there. And the Krefeld School is a really innovative and interesting progressive school where we graduate students by exhibition. So what that means is that, yes, they have to take their classes and they get grades in their classes, and they have a pretty traditional looking transcript of that because we want Burge and Cornell to be able to read it and figure out what our kids have done. But on page 2 of the transcript, we have a 16-piece portfolio that our kids do. Everyone does. And there are projects, there are oral exams, and the students have tremendous agency over what it is that they're doing. And so when a student, and so all of the titles of all of the things that they're doing end up listed on their transcript. Of course, they don't finish it until, I don't know how much it benefits them in the college application process, honestly, because I'm not sure, it's in progress when they're applying, and even though it's well described on our website and in our profile, I'm not sure how much colleges look at it or care. But our kids get a lot out of it. And they, for a kid who, for instance, has a passion for cooking, they may end up doing a science experiment that has to do with food or calories or something, and they may choose their oral exam topics. They can kind of curate how they want to show themselves and what they want to learn. And so you get kids who are doing these very broad and disparate things, and you get kids who are sort of focused in. And it's cool, and it's nice, and it's also a way of honoring each kid, because one of the things that I get concerned about with, okay, so only 5 kids are going to get this leadership distinction, or there's, is that so much of education is about sorting, and I feel like that is so wrong, and it's not really, nobody, well, I hope, got into education because they were like, yeah, I want to sort kids. We all got here because we want to help kids and elevate them and have them become the best people that they can be. And so how do we lift all of them up? How do we find ways to celebrate every one of our kids? And it's very hard in a school of 1,000 kids, or, even in a smaller school. I think that it's not our orientation to do so. We're naturally inclined somehow to sort, and I don't like it. So I think in that the mastery transcript, I think, is trying to address that to some extent, and trying to sort less and describe more, but I don't know where they really are in terms of being able to roll out at this point.
My concern is a practical one, one of timing, one of staffing. I've read applications where there are no grades, and it just takes more time. You have to do your due diligence in reviewing those, and as you know, for some places, already getting through the applications it can be problematic, especially in wanting to do it in a timely way, where you're getting decisions out in time for students to make informed decisions. And so if we're receiving large numbers of transcripts that look like that, are we truly going to be able to get through them in a way that we are benefiting the students? As you all know, we've all done case studies here and there, and the example of just showing folks, how much time you really have on one application isn't a ton. But I know over the years when I've read those applications with no grades, you throw it out the window because you really do. And these are places that have done it for years, and every year it's okay, different student, different process. I actually need to spend the time to read through this to get a sense of where the student falls in the spectrum of that institution, that school.
Yes.
Let's get back a little to it. A question you were asking this morning, and kind of in a totally different vein from what you were just talking about, but how do we move the conversation, or are we ever going to be able to move the conversation where we are not using adjectives like selective, elite? And even this morning, somebody said, like, you can be from this kind of school and still go to a good college. Like, okay, maybe there are some that are bad colleges, but do we really think that there are so many bad colleges that we need to be able to say that, like, oh, you can go to a good one? from an administrative side, are we going to impress donors or potential applicants to our high school with where our students are accepted? Are we going to look good for the neighborhood we are representing as a public school because we are graduating students into select schools? Like, is there any chance of getting rid of that language and just say a good school is the one that you're going to graduate from?
So, no. This is a great topic for discussion. How do we, in the process of disrupting the labels that we use around colleges, particularly when we use labels like elite, highly selective is also code word for elite these days, even though it also is a measure of their acceptance rates. And how do we transform that so that students can be proud of whatever label they choose to emblazon on the school that they choose to enroll? And what makes a good college versus a not good college?
So I'll start this out. So one, I think we have to get away from just rankings in general. I think in some ways to help. We have to stop touting these low accept rates. Because I think what it's done is it's actually put just unrealistic expectations on students in general, regardless of where they fall in the GPA range, whether they're top student or whether they're middle of the road or the lower end. I think they're just unrealistic expectations where they all feel like they have to be superstars to get into not just the good schools, but any school. And that's where I get worried. And if you talk to some of these children, and they tell you, some of these students, and they tell you, I sleep 3 or 4 hours a night, like, that's not healthy. But they think they need to do this to get into just about any place. So I think we have to own the conversation to a degree, even when we think about the labeling, likely, target, reach. We're already putting them into different categories of what a good school is without necessarily saying it in some cases. And so I think I like the conversation the comment you made regarding the good school is the school you go to, and kind of leaving it at that. But I think there are those just expectations that everyone has to get into some type of name brand, whether it's for the bumper sticker on the car or the country club conversation, which is all unfortunate. And not that I'm giving an answer, but just sharing the frustration that would love to get away from it. And this is coming from someone who's worked at 2 very different institutions, and I have to say, being at a place where I can say yes more just means a lot.
I would jump in too and say, one thing that I noticed about what you said was, you started with the word children and then switched to students, but let's go back to that. Like, they are children, right? And what are we doing to them? From this very young age, kind of setting this up that that this is a goal to be attained, and if they don't attain this goal, that then what? Like, we don't even say what could happen, but it's like this, catastrophic crisis if they don't get into the school that we want them to. And I think that, college is not a destination, right? It is a part of your journey. You don't die there, God willing, and that is not the end of your life. It is in some ways part of the beginning of your adulthood. And so there's so much time, and there's so much, I sometimes think about, well, I guess there are 2 things I would want to say. One is that I ask parents to think about what they want for their children when their children are 40 years old. So what do you hope for your child at age 40? And what they usually say is that they say, well, I want them to be partnered with someone that they love and who loves them, and I want grandchildren, so I hope they have children, and I want them to own their home, and I want them to have a job that they really like going to, and I want them to not have to worry about too much about money, right? And so we know that there are many, many paths to get those things in life. You don't have to, Harvard is not the, the funnel for that. And there are plenty of unhappy people who go to highly selective or elite schools. So if we can take a broader look, I think that that's helpful. But also about the rankings piece, I agree with you 100%. I think it's lazy. I think it's like laziness and a lack of imagination to say we only have this one way of describing how good something is. We have to put it on a scale, and we're gonna use a number, and this is it. And you know, it doesn't translate into other areas, right? So if you go into a nursery and you ask, let's assume there's a horticulturist there, and you go to the horticulturist and say, hi, I'm here to purchase the best plant. Well, what does that mean? That doesn't make any sense, right? Nobody's here to purchase the best plant. I want the one that's ranked number 1. Like, that's not a thing, right? And actually, what the horticulturist is going to ask you is, well, where is this plant going? Is it indoors? Is it outdoors? What does your yard look like? Does your yard get sun or shade? What's the pH level of your soil, if we want to get technical about it, you know? Are you someone who likes to tend, or do you want to let it go? You know, what are we really looking for here? And that, to me, those are the kinds of questions that we can then translate into fit. And talking about, you know, if we imagine for a moment that our children, because they are children, are plants, you know, it's like, okay, so where can I plant you where you will thrive? Are you a kid who needs a lot of tending? And who, you know, are you a kid who really needs to be sort of left alone and will thrive in the wild? Are you, you know, are you easily overwatered, or do you live in water? Like, where, you know, what is the right environment for you? And I think it's by asking those questions that we actually start to get into really what the notion of fit is about. And that's where the rankings cease to make any sense, and they're not important anymore. But those are conversations that take time. They're not sound bites. They're not easily described in the media. And certainly when you're getting your hair done and you find out that you know, the woman who's doing your hair, her cousin's nephew's daughter, you know, had a very bad experience at that school, like, well, you know, we can't possibly apply there. There's so much noise in the system, I guess, that it can be hard to have those real conversations. But that's where I think we have to do it. And I think, you know, for students who are lucky enough to actually have a relationship with a counselor where they can actually have conversations over time, that's, you know, that's where those conversations go, to me.
So, full disclosure, I've been trying to figure this one out for a long time. Grew up in rural northern Pennsylvania, and about a third of my high school class went to college in general. And so the obsession over certain places or certain brands just never really clicked in my mind, and I was fortunate enough to have an adult in my life, my mother, who pushed me to think about college and what that looked like and why. And so I feel very strongly now in my professional world that every child deserves that adult in their life. And I think the answer to this question comes back to the adults in their life. And based on where they're from, you know, what are the questions that we're asking as counselors, not just in our day-to-day interactions with them, but our day-to-day interactions with, or weekly or monthly interactions with the college board or with colleges. You know, my role serving on certain university advisory boards, I feel, is to help that college see the bigger picture, right? I mean, why are you still requiring a student to send specific scores by a certain date when you're not actually asking for their transcript information, but having them self-report that? Why can't 1 and 2 be the same in that instance? So I mean, I feel like the adults, we as adults and educators have to ask bigger questions, if we're going to disrupt the system, we are the ones that are going to do it. And I think, you know, even with the rollback from the UC system, or potential rollback from requirement of testing, you know, that's happened in so many institutions already. I think those questions have been asked, but I think from my time working in college admission and my time now working in a high school, I have more questions for some of those big drivers of this process as to the why. Why hasn't this changed? Why can't this change? I kind of know some of those answers, but I feel more empowered now having the perspective to be able to be the one, or be one of many asking a similar question.
I don't know if I can add too much other than to say, building on Stacey's point, I think we need better tools to assess fit that are not so human driven. Like, I mean, I think we put a lot on the human beings in this process to decode for these young people and not so young people. So, I mean, to me, I think there was better access to tools. But in the end, I mean, I'm getting the sense, I don't know if you are, that we all kind of feel in a similar way and have for a long time, and it hasn't changed. So if that's the case, maybe we need something bigger. Like, I'm not saying I endorse this idea, but this lottery idea that I think is going to gain a lot of traction in the next few years, as long as we keep thinking that, okay, selective, good, University X basically admits and enrolls the exact number of students who can be successful at that institution, and that everybody's not admitted is not able to be successful at that institution, then that's going to perpetuate that myth. But the reality is, at a place where 95% are rejected, they probably could have gone in that 5 to 10% range and found another couple hundred students who still would have been successful. But if the perception remains only those who will be successful are sort of given the keys to the kingdom, then why would that change? Why would anything change? But if somehow there's an element of chance and risk and randomness to it, then perhaps we start to see it a little bit different. I don't know. I'm not, again, not endorsing the lottery idea, just suggesting that it's one of those things that would completely change our perception of the process.
So I'll give you the summary one first to save Dave some work. How can we come up with a system, either on the student end or on the college end, that's sort of immune to gamification? And by that I mean, like, kind of what Cornell was like so, well, I did this extracurricular activity. Well, do you like it? No, college is like that. Right? Stuff, how do we come up with a system that's not gameable and actually gets people where they want to go rather than doing what they should do or told they should do?
So the question is, how do we create a system that is not gameable, or how do we reduce the amount of gaming the system that students and families feel the need to put forth? And as part of that, where does that start? On the college side with the application, or on the high school side with the advising and encouragement?
Well, I'll jump in and just say I don't know. I mean, I think that, this has been a problem for a really long time. And so, in the early part of the 20th century, most of the people who were going to college were white and male and landowning. And at some point, there was some notion that other people should be able to go too. And this test, the SAT, that was supposed to be the great equalizer, came along to say, now it's a meritocracy. And, over time, we've realized that that the test is very flawed and is gameable, right? And that people with money can actually pay money to learn how to do it better and get better scores. And that has sort of been the case for every piece, right? So it's like, okay, well, we'll do recommendations. Well, who has access to teachers who can write great recommendations? It's generally, the wealthier the kid, the more likely they are to be in a position to be able to get recommendation letters from teachers who are not, overworked and serving too many kids. Who can, we'll look at extracurriculars. Well, who can participate in extracurriculars, So all of these things, and I think, honestly, I think one of the best things that's happened is, it's very small, but over time is that Common App added like employment and paid work and family responsibilities into the extracurricular sections, so that kids who spend a lot of time caring for their younger siblings or who work to contribute to the family income can actually show that, which I think was great. But I don't know, because it feels like every element you add in to try to equalize things, people with money pretty much, or people pretty much figure out very quickly, how can we make this, how can I throw money at that situation and game it?
I think your question speaks, and in some ways, directly or indirectly, to access, equity, inclusion. How do we balance this process for all? And it's a tough question. For those of us who visited a range of schools, you go to a rural school, you go to an inner city school versus public, private, public in a suburbs, and you realize the difference very quickly. And how do you then review those applications with the exact same tools, with the exact same metrics? And you realize it's not a balanced process. So if someone could come up with with a process that isn't gameable or that doesn't disadvantage or advantage others, I think that person's going to do quite well in a very short period. But at least I think in listening to that question, it comes up often, and every time I hear it, we're all acknowledging that this system has faults and is problematic, and yet we still hear certain institutions talk about there just aren't enough qualified students from lower socioeconomic, middle income families who may be rural or coming from urban areas. And the reality is that they're clearly not looking at some of those students in the light that they should.
And maybe only just to piggyback on that, does it come back to each of those students just simply having the same opportunity or a similar opportunity? Again, full disclosure, a lot of my time outside of admission or counseling work is spent in Harrisburg and DC thinking about policy. In Pennsylvania, we have almost 500 school districts and no funding formula to dole out the state's dollars to those school districts. We all live it, we make home purchases based on district and see the variance there. But even a simple thing at this, the state has been cheap in investing in students at the K-12 level in that way here in Pennsylvania. What is the role not just of our schools and our students and our counselors, but also of our government, right? I mean, when we think about how students even get to the pipeline to be thinking about college, where does that start? I think that starts at a far earlier level. And we don't happen to live in a place where that is an equitable conversation from kindergarten on.
And college is a blame. To answer the last part of your question, I don't blame any school counselor, any family that figures out the game, as long as they're not doing anything illegal or unethical, obviously. But I don't know. I mean, we write the rules. How can we be upset with you for figuring out how to operate within those rules? So, I mean, I think the only way to really get rid of it is to factor in, is to eliminate somehow that choice. But as soon as you make it something to win, then it is going to be gamified, period, no matter what we say or do.
Sean?
So in a lot of innovation work, you talk about the sort of inertia of the status quo. And I'm going to, this sort of goes into what you said about the language of exclusivity and inclusivity. Our existing system is incentivized, right? If you're exclusive, that's something that you can use to sell a K-12 education, to sell a higher ed education. Where, from your perspective, are the places where you could incentivize inclusivity versus exclusivity?
Great question.
For many programs and places, exclusivity is a marketing factor, and it's something that they can go out there and sell. Where are places within the college admission process and within college success for students can we incentivize inclusivity?
Yeah, so how many people here are familiar with ATI, American Talent Initiative? I hope a lot. If not, it's an organization that is ultimately bringing to light the fact that there just aren't enough lower socioeconomic, middle income families who are at certain types of institutions. And so what their goal is to try to increase that number of students who are at these institutions. And they're putting money behind it, they're doing research, they're actually bringing deans, directors, VPs, provosts, presidents together to have these discussions ultimately on how to increase the number of Pell eligible students at these institutions. And if nothing else, they're at least, I would argue, shedding a light on some schools that really should and could be doing better because they have resources to do better. And what I like about it is that they're not just measuring, how many students you get in, but just as important, how many students are graduating. So I think we need more organizations, and not to say college universities don't know what they should be doing, because we do. We know that's one, there are very strong and qualified students who can be successful at all of our institutions. And not that we need someone to say, hey, you should be doing this, but I think having an organization bring it to light and then make news about it definitely, I think, encourages institutions to say, you know what, If we're gonna join ATI, we ought to do better in that regard. Just one way.
That's an excellent answer. I also would say too that I think colleges do tout inclusivity as a major goal and as a major accomplishment, right? Even when they're not that inclusive in the admission process, right? They're not necessarily inclusive in the admission process, but they talk about inclusivity and access, and they quote Pell eligible, stats, and they talk about their offices of multicultural affairs and the initiatives that they have going on, and their LGBTQ initiatives. And I think that as a value, I think many colleges hold inclusivity as a high value, but it doesn't translate down into admissions. And I do think it's this piece of like, as long as we are, and I think everything that you said, Burge, is really right about as long as it's a game to be won. And I do feel like, Fitzsimmons has said, right, that, so he's the Dean of Admissions at Harvard, and he has said that he could go, 10 classes deep, right? He takes a class of kids out of the applicant pool, throws them in the trash, takes another kid, and he would have to take 10 or 11 classes out of one applicant pool before he saw any drop in quality in the incoming class. So in effect, it is a lottery system, but we are not recognizing that for those schools, but we're not recognizing that it is. And so then when a kid gets in, we say merit, merit, merit. But really, 85% of the kids who are applying to that school probably could do the work and, may have very similar stats to each other. So, and then I think there's this question about like inclusivity and fairness and like what is fairness? And I think that when you're talking about a limited commodity, it's really hard to figure out, like fairness starts to compete, right? Is it fair that, well, but my dad went there, and so I should be able to go there. If I can't, it's not fair, right? You could say that. And, that's one way of looking at fairness. And another way of looking at fairness is like, yeah, your dad went there, so like, let's let some other people in for a change, right? That may be fair. So I think it's a really, I think you're right, that as long as we're in a place where it is looked at as a commodity, it's very hard to move anything around that area.
I had two very specific things that we can do. One is specifically in the U.S. News and World Report rankings, the weight placed on selectivity be completely eliminated, if not reversed. Secondly, then, or rather along those same lines, to then put a greater value than what has presently been placed on social mobility, and a better definition of that, which I'm not smart enough to lay out for you today, but I believe it exists out there. That's number one. Because colleges do care about how they're perceived. The second thing that colleges care about is money, right? And it's not why we're there, but in order to keep the lights on and to remain economically viable, CEOs of all varieties care about that a great deal. So the Pell number, the Pell contribution from the federal government has not kept pace with the costs of institutions, which means that it comes back on the good graces of the institution to discount their price to become more inclusive to students who can't afford to pay. And I know we're not just talking about students who can't afford to pay in this conversation, but they're a big part of it, if not the biggest part of it. And so if there was an incentive provided by the feds of more federal resources that could be associated with that type of enrollment, I think it would absolutely make sense. Again, even those two are perhaps band-aids, but I think you're sniffing around the right idea, which is how do we can't fee on it, we can't say it's going to happen, we can't make colleges do it. So then we're left with trying to figure out a way to incentivize them to do the right thing to begin with. Because I'm maddened by the number of institutions that talk about inclusivity and do anything but live that life, or they'll celebrate inclusivity based off of that student or that student or that student. And we can't live in that world and be authentic. So if we can come up with an authentic measure and feed it appropriately, then you create the incentive that's powerful for colleges.
don't you also feel like U.S. News and World Report, like it's a beast that feeds itself, right?
Agreed.
And it's also like it can't, you could never, they could not, if they redid their rankings in such a way that Mason was #1,
Sure.
do you think that people would then just be like, oh, rankings don't mean anything anymore?
So there will be.
You know?
Except for us, we would say it's the best thing ever.
I agree with that, but I think, but don't you think that people would then just stop buying U.S. News and World Report, which de-incentivizes them, right? I mean, I think they're highly incentivized to take 5 colleges and just reshuffle them at the top 5 spots year after year, because people love it and they go for it. But I think if someone else came in there, I think people would just be like, I think they'd go out of business.
I think that's an excellent point. If you look at the noise in the rankings, right? I mean, you can find a ranking and one where you do really well and promote that as sort of the end-all be-all, right? And I think in that regard, U.S. News as a ranking has already gone down in its influence. However, you know, I still hear it cited so much. I don't know about you and your work, if parents come in and continue to focus on it. But you're right, the system is self-fulfilling in every vertical.
If I could add, I would rethink the peer perception aspect of U.S. News as well, because it's a popularity contest. And so prior to my time at Allegheny, I had never done the survey. And so they sent one to the president, one to the provost, and one to the VP for Enrollment or dean director. And it is literally a popularity contest. They're asking you to fill in the boxes, you know, whether a school's a good school, not a good school, you don't know it. And so obviously there's a number of schools out there that we all know all too well, that of course you're gonna rate them at a certain level because you know them. And so I think that's another piece that they could probably get rid of, because in the same, on the flip side of that, there are just gonna be some schools that people aren't gonna be as familiar with, but that doesn't necessarily take away the value of that institution. And but by default, that's exactly what we're doing every time we fill out the peer perception for U.S. News.
We have a question from our Facebook audience. It says, I think the pressure of testing to meet standards and satisfy curriculums are making kids robotic and self-reliant. I applaud the schools that encourage creativity and fosters independent learning and allow exploration of other talents. How do you foster this conversation at the high school level?
If that question were for me, I was going to say, hi, Mom, but that's not me.
Oh boy, yeah. Think about this one for a second.
So the question is about fostering at the high school level about creativity. I'm sorry, I just didn't totally parse it.
And I just handed it off. But
You want me to reread it?
Yeah.
the emphasis on test scores and performing well in a designated curriculum and what I've had students refer to as grade chasing stifles creativity in many ways. And so you'll have students who dedicate more effort towards that grade chasing and then less to the intangibles, to the extracurricular activities, to the things that may make them pop as an applicant. So on the high school side, how do we break that cycle? And on the college side, how do we encourage them to explore those creative pieces and still be able to find success in the college process?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that my school, the Krefeld School, has done an excellent job of that. And part of it is that it is a progressive school, it's those values, so we are drawing kids and families to the school who are already predisposed to want those things, right? So it's easier for us in that sense. But I think that, you know, I think engagement is a huge piece of it, and engagement and agency. So when you are allowing kids to actually have some agency over things that they're interested in, rather than constantly forcing them to do stuff, you know, that's number one. And that can happen even within a classroom, right? That we're reading The Great Gatsby, but you know, and here are my goals as an English teacher, here are my goals for how to I want to assess your understanding of the novel. And so I want to see this from you, I want to see that from you, I want to see the other from you. How can you show me that you've met the goals? You know, and then even allow the students to come up with projects, papers, whatever it is, that are meeting your goals as a teacher, so that there's some agency there. I think engagement is the other piece, and I think that, so I think, for instance, community service is a hugely important thing that teenagers should be doing. All humans, but I don't have control over all humans, but I do have control over a certain set of teenagers. So yes to community service. But I hate these service days that schools do where they, you know, everyone goes to the park and cleans it up for a day, or we all go and do one soup kitchen thing. At Krefeld, one of the things that we do is kids pick a community service project that they're going to be part of, and they do that project for the entire year, 2 hours a week, every Wednesday, and they make relationships. So we have a group of kids who were going down to the senior center and they were playing bingo. Well, it turns out that one of the women there was really frustrated because her hands shook and she couldn't do her nails anymore. And so one of our kids offered to do her nails. Well, bingo turned into manicures, and the boys all learned to paint nails, and we just, but it was the need of those residents that came from, and those kids got so much more out of that kind of service than they do out of those one-shot deals. And so it's a little bit of a self-serving answer, number one, but also it's not a total answer because it doesn't necessarily prevent grade chasing, but I do feel like when we are able to show kids a richer life and a more authentic life and one that involves service, I think that grade chasing ends up looking pettier and not as compelling. And so I feel like, you know, having them truly engaged in their own lives and in meaningful work is one of the things that we can do to try to shift that narrative a little bit.
So I just have a couple quick thoughts, but one back to what we were just talking about a little bit, and it's maybe owning the fact that, and talking openly about this, that, you know, merit in college admission is talked about all the time, but it's not really about merit, right? Perfect score or perfect grade doesn't get you in to dream school. Never has been based only on merit, right? And so getting students to understand that is a hard question, but, you know, how often do we ever say that or talk about that? You know, it's not that you've done anything wrong. In that instance, you did everything right. And still, you might not get into your top choice school. So I think it is on us as parents to talk about that, or as counselors to share openly that, you know, perfection doesn't look like that necessarily. And then give opportunities to celebrate those other pieces. I think that's where the you know, what you're talking about exactly. And thinking about it in our own world and empowering students in even in class time and defined experiences, whether that's, you know, not in the normal semester, trimester, however it's defined at a high school, but taking the time to do that Maymester, J-term, whatever it might be. For us, it's been a J-term experience, which I think allows even students to pitch ideas for a class that they want to teach, that they want to co-teach, you know, giving faculty some of that flexibility as well, but then allows them to be really more engaged in some of that creativity, or allowing students the capacity and ability and the time in school to develop something that they're proud of that could be shared in a greater way. I don't know that I have the answers to any of that, but I think all of those pieces could be components of it.
I think there's also this piece that when you talk about perfection, it makes me think of mistakes, right? And that making mistakes is really important as a part of life, and knowing how to survive making mistakes. And I think that we've set kids up so much that we've decided that the stakes are super, super high in high school, when actually the stakes are really low in high school. High school's a great time to make mistakes because, you know, you won't be tried as an adult. Most of the time, if your mistake is small enough. And, but it's a good time to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes and to gain some experience which will lead you to wisdom in one day. And I think that, you know, but we've set it up so that Kids, kids who are aiming for a certain thing cannot make any mistakes ever. And I don't know that that's very useful in terms of their development as a human being.
What do high schools like us in 5 years and colleges in 10, when the parents of the children applying are now millennials and have already are probably still paying off their undergrad loans? What has to change in there? Because it may change from them being looking at selectivity to value, but what do we as institutions have to do to be ready for that change?
How do we adjust for millennial-aged parents in the college process in terms of institutions and how we promote the value proposition to families who are already paying off student loan debt, taking on more debt for the next generation?
I'm hopeful that they'll be the disruptors. I'm hopeful they'll look back and say, that was not a fun process. I was talking to flying back from somewhere, and I'm talking to a student, a sophomore, junior in college, and she goes down this road of, I went to this high school, so of course, in admissions is always the name game. Where'd you go to school? What state are you from? And we all know all the schools, and so we go into detail. A really good school that she went to, and she starts to talk about the experience of applying to basically top schools. And how there were days at this high school, her and some of her friends would just cry. I thought, but that doesn't sound like fun. But for her, it was, we were working at a level of trying to be perfect. We were working towards perfection. And so the hope is that this generation that's gone through this process will look back and say, nah, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. And if it hasn't changed, I hope it's already changed by then, but if it hasn't, that they'll be the ones that say, we've got to approach this a little bit differently. And oh, by the way, a number of those kids ended up at great schools with great experiences at, I won't name the school, it wasn't necessarily, a top X, and it sounds like having the right type of experience, and it turned out to be the right match. Bright kid, too. And so that would be my hope.
Couple of things. First of all, we should assume it will change dramatically when that happens, right? And so I've been thinking about how colleges changed when millennials arrived, how workplaces have changed when millennials arrived. There's absolutely no reason for us to assume that there won't be complete renovation of the parenting experience consistent with sort of that millennial attitude. The X factor there, from my point of view, is how are the colleges going to change to accommodate the Gen Z group first? Right, so I think about some of we know a little bit about them. You know a lot from working with them, but in terms of the hardcore research on that group, it's not as well defined as the millennials. So already though we know certain things about the idea of finding a good circumstance is more important than money, right? Like that's one thing I think we know. Like so finding they would much rather have the freedom to take classes on a schedule that is agreeable to them than it is to save a lot of money or to spend a lot of money. They're less price averse for certain things. And we're gonna have to change. Like we're gonna have to operate differently over the course of the next 10 to 15 years to accommodate that. The question then is that will the millennial children, or the children of millennials that will follow, are they going to swim upstream to that? And I think that's a big question mark right now. The one thing I know for sure is that we're going to have to get this cost issue under control, period. Full stop. Like, no matter what that is. That may be on the college side, that may be on the federal government side, that may be on the state side, I don't know. But my wife carried college debt for a better part of our marriage when she was paying that $1,000 per month, or $1,000 per semester price tag. With the average debt being in the $25,000 to $30,000 range, we should expect that to be a lot more significant. And one idea that I'm following pretty closely, just to see if it has legs, and some places have done it, is this idea of an income share agreement, which is it has a lot of familiarity to loans, but it's almost like the Australian system where it's tied to your earning potential over the course of your life, which potentially minimizes the month-to-month effect of those student loans. It has other risks that I think have to be monitored and weighed and measured. But if we pivot to something like that, which focuses less on education as a one-time expense that just happens to follow you for your life, regardless of the success that you achieve because of that education, to a model that is the success in your life that you achieve because of that education is somehow then proportional to what you have to pay. That's an interesting idea to me. I think that as we see the next 5 or 10 years, before the children and millennials get to us, that idea of getting fully fleshed out will be significant.
Maybe just a last piece to that, and to something you said earlier about your child not wanting to take on that debt. Are there alternate options that just are not accepted at this moment? The plumbing trades that may have a very lucrative career. We all could recognize that, but maybe just isn't viewed in the same linear path, right? Whatever that trade might be. I think there's a lot of really interesting things that maybe aren't a common choice to this generation, but could shift, hopefully.
I do think part of the issue, though, is that in the society, we do equate cost with quality, which is problematic for a whole host of reasons. And I ought not give this example, but I will. Cheapest regal effect. We've all heard that, right? Here's something that was not maybe the most expensive. They weren't doing well. Bottom shelf, they raised prices, made it to the top shelf. It's now a big hit. And so that impact of thinking, cost is better is problematic. I would also say, though, I think for sometimes when I speak with families and they talk about the cost of education, these schools that cost X amount, typically there are other schools that they're saying no to, who are giving them scholarship dollars at high levels. And so while, yes, cost of education has gone up, so is discount. And discount is at an all-time high. And so there are schools that are giving large merit or aid to families. It's just a matter of decisions. And in some families, I know you all hear it on your side of the desk as well, I'm willing to pay X amount for this school, but I won't for other schools. So I'm going to go into debt here, even though this other school is giving me 50% discount.
We're coming to the end of our time for this session, so I just want to bookend this discussion. I started by asking you if you would provide some advice that you would give to a student as they are beginning this process. And we know that the college application and search process can be a great time of growth and transformation for the students as they go through it. And so what advice would you give to the parents who are starting this process to reframe it for them so that they can keep the focus on the process being transformational for their students?
I always remove "we" from your vocabulary. That one seems like a very basic thing, but the language we use as parents is a really big impact from an earlier age. Even we as counselors or we as schools getting students in, I think, is another "we" that should not exist.
So I went and spoke to some parents at my daughter's a freshman in college this year. And I went back in September and spoke to parents of juniors after school. And I asked her before I went, I said, what advice would you like me to give the parents? And she said, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm just going to go for it. She said, thank you, head of school says okay. She said, tell them, don't be a dick. I was like, okay. Thanks, honey, but now can you tell me what you mean by that? And she said, she had great advice for parents. She said, A, this process is not about you. This is about your kid, and remember that. And she also said, Mom, the best thing that you did for me in the college process was believe in me. and to know that, and this is what I do tell all the parents of my students, is, your job is not to worry. And I know you're worried, but you have to stop because you're leaking onto your children. And when you are so worried about them succeeding, you're giving them the message that they don't have the tools that they need. You're giving them the message that there's a reason for them to be worried about themselves succeeding. And so part of your job is to hold your child in unconditional positive regard. Thank you, Carl Rogers in the 70s. We love him. But hold your child in unconditional positive regard. And remember that they are great. You've done an amazing job of parenting your child. They are ready to do this process. They are ready for this stage. They are going to make some mistakes. They are going to make decisions that you may not agree with all the time. But to be able to support them and hold them in high regard, and to help and to remind your children that they are more important to you than the college that they're getting into, right? And so that you are proud of them regardless. And I think that that's, to me, the biggest thing that parents can do is to remember that their kid is going to be great no matter what school they go to. And if they can do that, I think it just takes so much off of the kids, and it allows the kids to then really explore. So that is my advice for parents. Don't be a dick. And hold your child in unconditional positive regard.
So full transparency, I just went through this process recently. And prior to it, there may have been some things that I thought about this process of, for parents, just take a step back. And then you get into the process as a parent, and you throw everything you've learned out of the window. And let's just say there were a couple of moments where my wife may have pulled me to the side and said, if you've been doing this for a while, I'm pretty sure you give better advice to families you're working with than what you're doing here. And there was that moment of realization of, yeah, this isn't good. And part of it was, in honesty, just wanting to talk, college all the time. Every time I would see my son in particular. Didn't matter where it was. Just get out the shower. Hey, where are you going to school? Get in the car. Hey, what are you thinking about majoring in? And it got to the point where we were just talking about it too much. And so the two pieces of advice I give. One is set aside, maybe one day a week, one time a week, to talk about whether it's the college search process or major, what have you. And what you'll realize is that they'll end up coming to you more afterwards, to the point where my son was texting me, what about this school, what about this school, what about this school? No. But at least he was reaching out to me, because we only had that one time set aside a week to where it wasn't stressful on either side. So that would be the first one. The second one, you touched on as well. Letting them know at the beginning of the process that you are, and you will be, proud of them and still love them, regardless of what school they end up at. I think that then gives them the power to say, you know what, I really can pick a place that is, the right match for me personally, because I now have my parents, support wholeheartedly, knowing it at the beginning. And so I think that one's an important one, because again, you talk to some of these students, and they're just so stressed that they're going to, most importantly, disappoint their parents more than anyone else. And so allowing them that space to know that, no, you can't. And I'm really proud of you regardless, goes a long way.
I doubt I can say anything too much better than what has already been said, other than maybe to share. College was the most awesome period of my life thus far, right? So I loved my college experience, and I want that for my children. And what I'm realizing is that there are a lot of different types of college experiences. And for me to want the same type of college experience I had to be my child's experience is busted, right? It's that, and if I'm going back and I'm giving, and I want to be on your side, friend. I want to have all three of them out. Let's just be honest. And what I want though is I want to be able for them to see that the college experience is different than what it was for me or what it was for my wife. And if we could start with the parents and saying, disassociate yourself from your own college experience relative to your child and realize that everything is entirely different. And what it was when you were there wasn't what it was for everybody. And if you start by just deconstructing that, I think you'd be surprised by what you can build in this place. That's my hope.
Well, thank you. I particularly want to thank Stacey, Cornell, Ian, and Burge for coming out and spending some time and sharing their thoughts with us. And so if we could give them a nice round of applause. And I want to thank all of you for coming out and being a part of this program today, and all of you who might be playing along at home. I want to thank Bernadette Kowaleski and Sean Yorgi, who were my co-disruptors in planning and executing this process. I'm really thankful for them. They did a lot of work behind the scenes to help make today possible. And I certainly want to thank Mr. Debbie and the whole Perkiomen school community for their support and participation, not just in today's event, but in all of the college counseling that goes on here at Perkiomen with our current, future, and previous students. So thank you to all of you as well. This does conclude our program today. As you make your way out, there are some little snack stations. Instead of producing a goodie bag for all of you, it's a choose your own adventure goodie bag. So help yourself to some snacks and some stickers and some fun things on the way out. And certainly, please travel safely. Thank you very much.